He stepped out of the dark, without a headlamp. That was the first thing Jason noticed. And every experienced hiker knows nobody walks a mountain trail at night without a headlamp. Nobody sane, anyway. It had been Jason's idea to do the Colorado backcountry trip. He and his brother Derek had moved to Denver a few years back, drawn by the mountains, always meaning to go deeper. They'd done plenty of day hikes, easy weekend stuff, but this time they wanted something real. 3 days out, no crowds, no signal, nothing but altitude and silence. Jason planned the whole trip, the trailhead, the route, the campsites. He'd been excited about it for weeks. His brother was less enthusiastic, but that was just Derek. He warmed up once you got him out there. He always did. There was one other car in the parking lot when they arrived, an old dusty SUV with out-of-state plates and a cracked side mirror. They barely glanced at it. You don't, usually. You're thinking about the trail ahead, the weight on your back, whether you packed enough food. You're not thinking about the other car. 8 miles in on the first day, they found the spot. A natural flat ledge 2/3 up the mountainside, a wide shelf of rock overlooking the entire valley below. The sun was setting behind the range and the sky had gone amber and rose, and then a deep bruised purple, the kind of color you only see at elevation. And Jason remembered thinking this was exactly why people leave cities. This exact feeling of being small in the right way, of being humbled by something vast and indifferent and beautiful. They pitched their tents, built a fire, sat talking until past 10, voices low, the fire warm against the thin, cold air. That was when they first heard it. Footsteps on the trail below, not the quick, purposeful rhythm of someone racing to make camp before dark. Slow, deliberate, considered, the kind of pace that belongs to someone who knows exactly where they're going and isn't in a hurry because they don't need to be, the kind of pace that has all the time in the world. Jason and Derek went quiet at the same moment, the same involuntary silencing, like a switch. They looked at each other across the fire. There was nobody else scheduled on this trail. That was the entire point of this trail. The man walked into the firelight a few minutes later. Mid-40s, maybe. Jeans, a dark jacket, a backpack that sat too flat on his frame, too light, too insubstantial for an overnight trip in the mountains. No trekking poles, no map. His face was calm in the particular way that faces are calm when they've been arranged to look that way, the relaxed expression of someone who had thought very carefully, in advance, about how to appear when he walked out of the dark into two strangers' campfire. His eyes moved across the site quickly, cataloging, before settling into that practiced stillness. He said hello like they were old friends, sat himself down on a log near the fire without being invited. Jason noticed that the man chose a seat between them and the trail, between them and the only way out. He said he was a park ranger, explained that a storm was coming in fast, that conditions on the upper trail would become dangerous overnight, that he needed to escort them to a safer area, tonight, right now if they didn't mind. He gestured toward the dark tree line to the north, away from the trail, away from any marked path, into the part of the mountain that had no name. Derek asked to see his badge. The man smiled and said he'd left it back at the station. "It's not far," he said. "Just follow me through those trees. There's a ranger cabin maybe 20 minutes north. You'll be safer there, more comfortable." His voice was even, measured, the voice of someone who had said these exact words before and learned from experience how they needed to land. Neither of them moved. Jason felt something happen in his chest that he couldn't name then and still can't name now. Not quite fear, not quite nausea, something more primitive than both. Something that lived below language and arrived before thought. Every hair on his arms had come up. He could feel his heartbeat in his jaw and his fingertips. "We'll be okay here," Jason said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "We've got solid shelter and good gear. We'll wait out the storm." A pause followed, a very long pause, during which the man's expression didn't change at all, and that was disturbing, because expression should change when a plan is refused. Something should shift. He looked at the tents, looked at their gear, looked at each of them slowly, in turn, with what felt like careful inventory. Then he said, "Suit yourselves," stood up, and walked back into the dark. No headlamp. He vanished into the tree line the same way he'd come out of it, like the dark was somewhere familiar, comfortable. They did not sleep that night. They kept the fire built high, taking turns adding wood, sitting back to back facing outward. Once, around 2 in the morning, Derek grabbed Jason's arm without speaking. They both heard it. Footsteps somewhere in the trees to the east, moving parallel to the campsite, off trail, deliberate, moving slow, then stopping, then moving again. Then silence that stretched until it felt like a held breath. Then, an hour later, what sounded like the same slow rhythm from the western tree line. Or maybe it was the wind. You tell yourself it's the wind. You need it to be the wind. So you say it over and over until dawn comes gray and the birds start and the darkness thins and you can finally breathe again. At first light, they packed everything without speaking, without coffee, without ceremony, and descended 4 miles in the cold morning air without stopping. Back at the trailhead, their truck, and beside it, still parked, engine cold, exactly as it had been the morning before, the old dusty SUV with the out-of-state plates. Someone had driven that car out there and not come back, or had come back in the night without being seen. They drove to the nearest ranger station and filed a report. Officers returned to the trail. They found nothing. No record of a ranger matching the description, no cabin 20 minutes north through the tree line, because there was no cabin. There was nothing north of that tree line except more mountain, and then darkness, and then a drop-off you couldn't survive. The case was closed 2 weeks later. The SUV's owner was never identified. Looking back, what haunts Jason most isn't the man himself, the calm face, the precise position between them and the trail, the badge he'd conveniently left behind. What haunts him is how close it came to being ordinary, how close he came to being the kind of tired, trusting person who thinks, well, he says he's a ranger, and follows someone into the dark because the alternative is confrontation, and confrontation feels rude. He's thought about this often in the years since, about how the man must have read that campsite, 2 brothers relaxed, not on alert, no one knowing their exact position, about how the request to follow him into the trees must have felt, to him, like something that would probably work. It usually probably worked. It didn't work that night because Derek asked about the badge. One question, asked in a flat and direct tone, produced a single crack in the presentation, and that crack was enough for Jason's body to make its assessment and refuse. One question, asked at the right moment, that's the entire margin. He doesn't go backcountry alone anymore, goes with Derek sometimes, in areas with signal, earlier in the day, easier trails. They still have fun, they don't talk about that night. But sometimes Derek will look at him in the middle of an ordinary day with an expression that doesn't need words, and Jason knows exactly what it means. They both do. He drove home from that trip without stopping for food or coffee, which was unlike him. He got inside his apartment, locked the door, and sat down on the couch and didn't move for a long time. His roommate at the time, a guy named Phil, came out from the bedroom and asked if he was okay. Jason said yes. Phil made dinner. They watched television. Everything proceeded in a completely ordinary way, which felt, at that moment, almost unbearable in its distance from what had happened the previous night. He called Derek the next morning. They talked for 2 hours. Mostly they replayed the sequence, the footsteps, the man, the seat chosen between them and the trail, the badge conveniently left at the station, the cabin 20 minutes north through the trees. They kept circling back to that detail, the cabin, and what it meant that they'd checked later and found there was nothing in that direction, just forest and then a cliff face you wouldn't survive. No trail, no cabin, no anything. They didn't say what they were both thinking. They didn't have to. They knew. Some conversations end when the words stop. Some keep going underneath, for years. Jason has never told this story in full to anyone except Derek. Parts of it, yes, the weird hiker, the guy claiming to be a ranger, but never all of it, never in order, never with the part about the SUV still in the lot in the morning, because telling it in full means sitting with what it actually was, and most days Jason prefers to keep that at a distance he can manage. Most days that works. Then there are the other days, the ones where he's driving somewhere at night and he passes a trailhead, a parking lot at the edge of a forest, dark, deserted, a sign with a trail map barely visible in the headlights, and something in his chest tightens without his permission, and he drives past faster than he needs to, and keeps driving. It started with a sound, just a sound. That's what strips you bare, how small it starts, how ordinary. Marcus had been camping in Michigan's Upper Peninsula for 3 seasons. He knew the UP the way people know a neighborhood they grew up in, the shape of the hills, the light through birch trees at midday, the way the pine smell changes in the hour before rain. He was the kind of camper who could identify bird calls before he'd fully woken up, who read weather from cloud formations, who considered himself quietly and genuinely competent in the outdoors. He wasn't the type who scared easily. He was wrong about that. He just hadn't found the right conditions yet. He'd picked a remote site in late October, far from the popular lakeshore spots, surrounded by birch and pine, and deep enough in that the nearest road was a hard 2 miles out. The trees had dropped most of their leaves by then, covering every surface. The entire forest floor was a dry, crackling carpet of copper and rust, so deep in places that you sank to your ankle with every step. It was beautiful in the way that late autumn is beautiful, generous with color, merciless with cold, stripped of any softness. It also meant the forest was loud. That's the particular truth about dried autumn leaves. You cannot move through them without sound. Every footstep, every gust of wind that shifts a branch and drops a leaf, every squirrel sprinting across the ground, all of it audible. A squirrel sounds like a man in October woods. A man sounds like something enormous and deliberate. Marcus knew this fact consciously. He knew it, and it didn't help. He'd been in his sleeping bag for maybe 20 minutes, flashlight off, the weight of fatigue pulling him towards sleep, when he heard it. One footstep. A single, deliberate crunch on the leaves somewhere to the north of his tent, close enough that he could gauge the distance. 20 feet, maybe slightly less. He held his breath. The second step came, then the third. Slow, steady, evenly spaced. Something moving at a pace it had chosen, not fleeing, not chasing, not wandering, a pace with intention. And the sound moved along the north side of the tent, then curved south, then continued curving, in a circle. Whatever was outside was circling his tent, moving in a slow, patient orbit that never changed speed and never once stopped. Marcus lay completely still. His sleeping bag suddenly felt thin, inadequate. His tent walls felt translucent, like whatever was out there could certainly see his shape through the nylon, the warmth of him, the outline of a person lying flat and trying to disappear. He told himself, deer. Deer do this. They sniff around campsites looking for food scraps. They move erratically through the dark. They stop and start and bolt at the smallest disturbance. He pressed his eyes shut and tried to match the footsteps to a four-legged gait, to find the double beat of hooves somewhere in that steady rhythm. But it wasn't there. The rhythm was two-beat, evenly spaced, the stride length consistent with something bipedal, and it did not stop to sniff. It did not startle. It moved with the focused, purposeful rhythm of something that was not searching for food, something that was circling, evaluating. The orbit completed once, then again, each loop settling slightly differently, sometimes the crunch closer to the tent wall, sometimes further back, but always curving back, always returning to the same patient circumnavigation. Marcus's fingers found his flashlight in the dark beside his head. He held it without turning it on. If he turned it on, he was admitting he was afraid. If he turned it on, whatever was outside would know he was awake. He lay there making internal bargains. If it comes closer, I turn on the light. If it touches the tent fabric, I turn it on immediately. He lay there for what he later calculated was just under 3 hours. The footsteps faded, eventually, growing quieter as whatever it was moved away into the trees, the crunching diminishing in distance and frequency, fading into the general white noise of wind and forest and his own heartbeat. He waited another full hour after the last sound he could distinguish before he trusted the silence enough to breathe normally. He did not sleep. When gray light pressed through the tent walls, he unzipped the door and stepped out, moving slowly, letting his eyes adjust. He walked the perimeter of the campsite, crouching low, scanning the leaves. Frog prints, hundreds of them, tiny, delicate impressions pressed into the decomposing leaf litter by the webbed feet of small frogs in mass migration. The entire perimeter of his tent had been circled and recircled by a column of frogs moving through the forest floor in the night, their combined tiny footsteps mimicking, with perfect acoustic fidelity, the slow and patient circling of something much larger. He sat down hard on the cold ground, then he started laughing. The deep, involuntary, chest-emptying laughter of a person whose body is releasing 5 hours of accumulated cortisol. Tears came with it. He sat in the thin October morning light and laughed until he was wrung out. He tells this story at parties now, gets a wonderful reaction every time, the slow build, the held breath, and then the reveal, the absurdity of being genuinely terrorized by migrating amphibians. He's told it 40 times over 3 years. It's a great story. But there is a part Marcus doesn't tell. Somewhere in the second hour, around 1 in the morning, footsteps still circling, body still rigid, flashlight cold and unlit in his hand, he stopped being afraid of what was outside the tent. He started being afraid of what was inside his own head. He watched himself build entire scenarios in the dark. He assigned motivation to an unknown presence. He felt rage and grief and animal terror in response to information he did not have, in response to a story he was telling himself with no evidence but sound. And somewhere in that second hour, he felt his sense of reality begin to loosen, very slightly, just enough to be aware of the loosening. Felt what it was like to be a human mind completely alone in the dark with no facts and too much imagination, and he found that he did not like what he found in there. The frogs were funny. What his own mind became in 3 hours of sustained, information-starved terror, that was something else. Marcus went back to the UP the following spring, to a different campsite, a different lake. He sat by a different fire on a different night and listened to the forest go quiet. He heard nothing unusual. He was fine. But at a certain hour, somewhere around 1 in the morning, he found himself very still, head tilted, listening with a quality of attention he had not possessed before October. He always will, now. That's the part that doesn't leave. The autumn after the frog incident, Marcus drove back up to the UP for what he told himself would be a simple test. He booked a designated campsite, the kind with a numbered post and a fire ring, and other campers within shouting distance. He pitched his tent, made dinner, sat by a fire. Everything was fine. He enjoyed himself. But around midnight, when the other campers had gone quiet and the forest settled into its nighttime register, a branch fell somewhere in the trees. Just one branch, the dry crack of it, and then the soft landing in the leaf litter. A completely ordinary sound, the kind that happens 10,000 times a night in any forest anywhere in the world. Marcus was on his feet before the sound finished. He stood in the dark outside his tent, heart going, flashlight in hand, listening with everything he had. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Nothing, just the ordinary dark, the ordinary sounds of a forest being a forest, the ordinary night. He stood there for a long time before he could make himself go back inside the tent. That's what the frog incident cost him, not a permanent terror of the outdoors. He still goes, still loves it, still thinks the UP in October is one of the most beautiful places in the world. But a flaw was installed in him that night, a lowest possible point below which his nervous system will not go calm. A vigilance that runs quietly underneath everything, that never completely rests, that responds to certain sounds in certain darkness with a speed and intensity his mind can't override. The frogs were frogs. He knows that. He's known it for 3 years. But his body learned something that night that his brain hasn't been able to fully unteach it. Some lessons go deeper than understanding. I'm going to tell you this exactly as it happened. I'd been over it so many times in the years since that I've worn away everything that isn't true, and what's left is just the sequence of events, plain and in order. This is what happened. I was 26. I'd been solo camping for a couple of years by then. Nothing extreme. 2 or 3 nights at a time, usually in areas I'd researched carefully. I liked the particular quality of solitude that only exists when you're far enough from roads that you can no longer hear them. There's a weight to real wilderness silence, an almost physical presence to it. I'd been chasing that feeling since I was a teenager. I drove 2 hours off the main highway that morning, parked at an unmarked trailhead I'd identified on a topographic map, and hiked 4 miles in on a faint, unmaintained path that hadn't seen another hiker in months, based on the growth across it. No trail markers after the first mile. Forest, compass heading, a creek on the satellite image that told me there'd be water where I was going. I found the clearing just before 5 in the afternoon. A natural opening in the pines, the creek running clean along one edge. No fire rings, no flattened grass, no sign that anyone had been there recently. The kind of place that feels like it's yours, specifically in that moment. I made camp, cooked a small dinner over the stove, and sat by a low fire as the light failed. The forest went from green to blue to black by degrees, and I sat in the middle of it feeling the peace of a person who is exactly where they intended to be. By 9, the fire had burned down to coals and I felt fine, good, even, happy. That's when I saw the figures at the tree line. Movement first, on the east side of the clearing, directly from the trees, not from the trail, not from any path, from the forest itself, the dark interior of it, and then shapes resolving out of the shadows into men as they walked forward. 4 of them, late 30s to mid-40s, all of them wearing dark and nondescript clothing, no backpacks, no visible camping gear, no headlamps. They walked in a loose group directly toward my fire, and not one of them spoke as they crossed the clearing. I stood up. My body did that before my mind had agreed to any particular course of action. They didn't stop when they reached my camp. 2 of them went directly to my tent, unzipped it, opened it, went inside and began moving through my gear with the focused efficiency of people who knew what they were looking for. The other 2 came to me. They put their hands on my shoulders, 1 hand each, firm and practiced, and began walking me backward, step by step, away from the fire, away from the light of it, toward the tree line. I spoke. I told them to take anything they wanted, that I had no intention of resisting, that they could have everything in the camp. My voice was shaking. They didn't respond, didn't look at me, just maintained that firm and practiced grip and kept walking me backward through the dark, the fire getting smaller behind us. And then I understood, in the way you understand things that your body has already processed while your mind was still catching up, that this was not a robbery. Robberies don't require you to be moved away from the campsite. Robberies are about the objects. If you want someone's objects, you make them stand still. You don't walk them backward into the trees. What happens in the 60 seconds after that, I can only partially reconstruct. My memory of it is fragmented in the specific way that high adrenaline memories fragment. Not a gap, not a blackout, but a series of still images with no coherent motion between them. What I know with certainty is that one of the grips on my shoulders shifted, some small adjustment of footing or position, and there was a single half-second of reduced pressure, and my body took it and ran before my mind had formed the word. I ran through the dark without a light. I fell once, hard, and hit the ground with both hands and my right knee, and was back upright before I'd registered falling. I ran until I found the trail by feel and followed it for 4 miles by instinct, and I reached my car with a bloody knee and shaking hands, and I drove 40 minutes before I could stop. I called the police from a gas station payphone. Officers went back to the clearing at dawn. My tent had been opened and searched. My sleeping bag was outside, unrolled, food scattered, nothing of value taken, and that detail, nothing taken, was the one the officers kept returning to in their questions because it told them something they clearly already suspected. The 4 men were not there when officers arrived. They were never identified. The investigation was formally closed within 6 weeks. A detective called me near the end of that period and told me, carefully and off the record, that the area had a history, that there had been previous reports of a similar nature, that the backcountry in that region was used by people who chose it precisely because of the distance from roads, from cell coverage, from anything that could summon help. I don't go camping anymore, not solo, not in groups, not anywhere that doesn't have cell signal and people nearby, and a way out I've confirmed in advance. Friends say I've gotten cautious as I've gotten older. I don't correct them. What I learned is this: wilderness is not neutral. The absence of other people is not the same as safety. The same geography that gives you silence gives you invisibility in every direction. You become invisible to danger, yes, but also to rescue, to anyone who might hear anything at all. Some people have mapped that invisibility down to the square mile. They know every corner of it. They've been working in it for years. There is no clean ending to this. There is no insight that makes it okay or finishes the story neatly. There is only the sequence and the knowledge and the way it sits in the body, heavy and specific and permanent. The forest is still there. The clearing is still there. I am here. That is the full extent of what I have. That's the lesson the wilderness taught me in the end. Not about what's out there, about the distance between where you are and where help is, about how wide that distance can be, and how long 4 miles can take, and how much can happen in the space between. I want to be specific about one more thing, because I think it matters and because I've never seen it mentioned in any account like this one. In the weeks after it happened, I found myself doing something I couldn't explain at first. I'd be in ordinary places, a grocery store, a parking garage, my own apartment building, and I'd find myself cataloging exits. Not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically. Corners, stairs, distances between me and the nearest door. It was as if my nervous system had downloaded a new piece of software without asking me, and now it ran constantly in the background whether I wanted it or not. I mentioned this to a therapist I started seeing about 2 months in. She said it was a very common response to the kind of situation I'd experienced. She said the brain, once it has been in genuine mortal danger, tends to update its threat model, and the update is rarely temporary. She said with time and treatment it often becomes less intrusive, less automatic. She was right. It's less intrusive now. I can go long stretches without noticing it, but it doesn't go away. It's been 3 years and it doesn't go away. I walk into a room and something in my mind notes the exits before I've registered the room itself. I park my car thinking about which direction I'd run. I stay close to walls in crowded places for reasons I understand intellectually are not currently relevant. That's what 4 miles in the dark, alone, running on a knee that was bleeding and hands that were shaking, that's what it installed in me. A new operating condition, a permanent adjustment to the baseline. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I want to be honest about what it actually costs. Not the night itself, dramatic as that was, but the thousands of ordinary days after it, each one slightly recalibrated. You come back from the forest, you just don't come all the way back. There's a version of this story where we all laugh about it over beers. We did for a while. Then someone pulled up the arrest report, and we read what the police had actually found about his location prior to the arrest. And after that, the laughter stopped completely. We don't tell this story at parties anymore. We've barely told it to each other in the past 2 years. 6 of us that August. A camping trip we'd done every year for 4 years running. Same general area, a remote national forest in the southeast, a site we'd found accidentally in our mid-20s and since claimed as ours. Far from the designated campground loops with their numbered sites and ranger check-ins. Far enough that we had genuine solitude, a wide field surrounded by dense pine, a fire ring we'd built ourselves from river stones over 3 seasons, a flat area by a creek half a mile through the trees. We knew the roads in. We'd driven them in the dark plenty of times. We thought we knew that place entirely. The first 2 days were exactly what they always were. Swimming in the afternoons when the heat was worst, long hikes in the early mornings when the air was still cool and the light came through the pines at that particular low angle. Long nights by the fire, staying up until 2 or 3, the kind of unhurried conversation that only happens when no one has to be anywhere tomorrow. The kind of easy time you spend with people you've known for 15 years, where you don't have to perform anything or explain anything, where you can just be. We were already talking about next summer before the second night was over. That's how it felt. Third night, midnight, or somewhere close. All 6 of us around the fire, drinks in hand, conversation running slow and comfortable. It was Tyler who noticed first. He didn't say anything immediately, just got quiet and turned his head, and then one by one the rest of us turned to see what he was looking at. Flashlights in the trees, not on the trail that ran along the north side of the field, off trail, in the deep brush, moving through the pines in the dark, one at first, then another, then what appeared to be 6 or 7 separate lights, all moving carefully, spread out across a wide front. The specific pattern of lights that looks like people who are looking for something. Covering ground, a grid. Not one of us spoke. The fire crackled and we all just watched, and the silence that fell over our group was the involuntary kind, the kind where your body makes the decision before you do. A figure emerged from the tree line at the north edge of the field, uniformed, sheriff's deputy, one hand on his radio, face neutral and composed in the specific way that law enforcement goes neutral when they are very focused and do not want to cause alarm. He walked across the field toward us with the deliberate pace of someone who has a great deal of information they are choosing, carefully, how to share. He asked us how many people were in our group, whether we'd seen anyone unfamiliar in the surrounding area in the last 24 to 48 hours, whether we'd heard anything unusual. My friend Ryan has a great many strengths. Knowing when silence is the right answer is not among them. Ryan asked the deputy whether we should be scared. The deputy looked at Ryan for a moment. just looked at him, steady and calm. Then he said plainly, "I'm not scared, but there are 20 officers in this forest right now and we all have guns." There was a silence that lasted perhaps 2 full seconds. Then I looked at the 5 people around that fire and said, "Pack everything, right now, no questions, we're leaving." We did not collapse the tents. We unpegged them and threw them whole into the bed of Tyler's truck, fabric and poles and stakes all mixed together. We left a full cooler, we left the camp chairs. The fire was still burning when we pulled out. We drove in convoy in the dark, both vehicles, no stops, no talking until we hit a gas station 40 miles south and parked under the fluorescent lights and sat in the lot trying to normalize our breathing. Tyler's phone found signal first. He looked at it for a moment before he said anything, then he turned the screen toward us. News alerts, accumulating for hours. A man wanted in connection with multiple homicides, tracked into the national forest 3 days earlier. Active law enforcement search, large scale, the kind that brings in officers from surrounding counties. Armed, considered extremely dangerous, located and apprehended approximately 30 minutes after our convoy left the campsite. At the campsite. The place where we had been sitting around a fire for 3 nights. The place where we had cooked food and told stories and fallen asleep in the dark. The place where, apparently, a man wanted for multiple killings had been somewhere in the surrounding tree line, watching our fire, watching us laugh, watching us be exactly as vulnerable as people are when they are comfortable and they think they're safe and they have no reason to believe otherwise. 30 minutes. I've thought about what 30 minutes is. It's a television episode. It's the time it takes to drive across a city. It is genuinely nothing. It's also, apparently, the entire margin between one version of that trip and another. I went back to the arrest report about 6 months later. The longer version, the detailed investigative summary that's public record but not easy to locate. I read it in my car, parked outside a grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, because I told myself I needed to know and I couldn't read it anywhere that felt like home. The summary contained a timeline, movements tracked by investigators in the hours leading up to the arrest, reconstructed from physical evidence, his location at various points, where he'd been and when. I read the relevant section twice. Then I closed the document and sat in the parking lot for a long time. I'm not going to describe what it said about the hours before we left. What I'll say is that I've thought very carefully about the right amount of information to carry, and I've decided that what I already know, that we drove out 30 minutes before the arrest, that he was at our campsite when they found him, is enough. It's the right amount. It gives me the full shape of the thing without the details that would colonize every ordinary moment. There are 6 of us. 2 have stopped camping entirely. The other 4 still go, but differently, closer to people, better traveled trails, charged phones, shared locations. Ryan asks fewer questions now. He's gotten much better at reading a room. But occasionally, on certain autumn evenings, someone will send a message in the group chat, just a campfire emoji, no words, and every time, whoever sees it first writes back the same thing, just, "I know." Because we do. We all do. We carry 30 minutes around with us everywhere we go, and we're grateful for them, and we always will be. I want to say something about Ryan. Ryan, who asked the deputy whether we should be scared. Ryan, who by all rights should have gotten us all killed with that question, and who instead got us an answer precise and direct enough that 6 adults were in motion within 30 seconds. I've thought about this a lot. Whether that question was the right one or the wrong one, whether a different question or no question would have produced a different response, a less clarifying one, and we'd have sat there another hour working up the nerve to leave on our own. The deputy's answer was the thing that moved us. Without it, I don't know that we pack up. I don't know that we leave in time. The flashlights in the trees were alarming, yes, but they could have been anything. Search and rescue, a lost hiker, a dozen explanations, 20 officers, all with guns, that has only one explanation. Ryan got us that answer, accidentally, the way Ryan does everything, with no filter and impeccable timing, and no idea that it was the right move. He was just asking what he wanted to know. But in that parking lot 40 miles south, reading those alerts, I looked over at Ryan in the passenger seat of Tyler's truck, and I felt something I've never been able to fully articulate. Gratitude doesn't cover it. Relief doesn't cover it. It's something in the vicinity of how it feels when you understand that the smallest, most accidental thing saved you. when you understand that the margin was that thin and the thing that covered it was pure stupid luck. We take the 30 minutes, and we take Ryan's question, and every year in the group chat, someone sends the campfire emoji, and we all know what it means. It was a perfect morning. That's what made it so wrong. Blue sky, early October light going gold through the pine canopy, the air cold and sharp and carrying the clean smell of high forest that you only find in places where nothing has burned for a very long time. The kind of morning that makes you feel genuinely intelligent for having chosen to sleep outside rather than in a bed. The kind that justifies every logistical inconvenience of getting there. He'd made camp 2 days before. Solo trip 4 miles from the nearest road, a spot above a small mountain lake that he'd found 2 seasons ago and returned to because it had given him exactly what he came for. Quiet, solitude, the particular feeling of being the only person in a wide radius of wilderness. He preferred it this way. He'd tried group camping and always found it exhausting, the negotiation of pace and destination, the noise, the performance of enjoyment. He was better alone out there, more himself. The trailhead had been empty when he arrived, no other vehicles. He'd taken note of that with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd planned well. He'd hiked in and set up and spent 2 days doing almost nothing of consequence, reading, watching birds, sleeping when he was tired. The lake below caught the morning light and held it. On the 3rd morning, he unzipped the tent, ducked through the opening, straightened up in the cold air, and stretched. He looked at the campsite. The fire pit, cold ash, exactly as he'd left it. His boots, outside the tent where he'd placed them, his pack leaning against the same tree, the camp stove sitting on the large flat rock he used as a work surface, exactly where he'd left it after dinner. Almost exactly. There was a cup on the rock, a metal camp mug, not his. He owned a similar one. He looked at it carefully, comparing, but this one was slightly larger, dark green in color, dented along one side in the way that gear gets dented from years of being packed and unpacked. Sitting at the center of the flat rock, placed with precision that could not be accidental, placed the way someone places something when they've thought about where to put it. The tea inside had gone cold, half drunk, the liquid sitting at the midpoint of the mug, the surface dull, the temperature of something that had been cooling for several hours. And beside it, to the right of the mug, on the bare surface of the rock, a tea bag. Used. Wrung out carefully and completely, folded once, set down in a neat and considered way, the small automatic gesture of a person who didn't want to make a mess, who was comfortable where they were, who expected to return and finish it. He stood very still. His mind offered explanations the way minds do, rapidly, each one seizing and then dissolving as it failed to account for everything. Another hiker who'd come through in the night and found the stove, but there were no footprints. He checked the perimeter of the campsite carefully, walking the full circle, crouching to look at the soft soil where impressions would hold. His own prints were clear and deep. There were no others. No other tent visible anywhere on the lake below, no voice calling a greeting from the trees, no sign of another human presence in any direction except for the cup on the rock and the tea bag beside it. He stood in the middle of his campsite and tried to construct a scenario, any scenario that accounted for all of the facts simultaneously. A cup that was not his, half drunk and cold, a used tea bag carefully wrung and set aside, no footprints, a man asleep in a tent 4 feet away who had heard nothing. He could not construct one that was benign. Because here is what the facts describe. Someone came to his campsite in the night, moved through soft soil without leaving impressions, which requires either extraordinary deliberateness or long and extensive practice at moving through wilderness without trace, located or brought a heat source and made tea, stood or crouched a few feet from a sleeping man and drank half a cup in no hurry, with no urgency, with no apparent awareness of having done anything unusual. Set the cup down at the center of the rock with the careful placement of someone who intended to return, wrung out the tea bag with the domestic precision of a person who was comfortable, who was at ease, who was somewhere they felt they belonged, and left. Without waking him, without taking anything, without leaving any mark on the ground. He packed up in under 20 minutes and descended to the trailhead. He stopped at the ranger station on his way out and filed a report. The ranger on duty listened carefully, wrote everything down, and then said, in a tone that tried to be reassuring and wasn't quite, that there were sometimes transient individuals who moved through the backcountry for extended periods, that most of them were harmless, that probably someone had spotted the camp from a distance and wandered over out of curiosity. Probably. He drove home and sat in his kitchen for a long time, thinking about the tea bag. Not the cup. The cup was just an object, wrong and unexplainable, but just an object. The tea bag was a behavior. Wringing out a tea bag is not necessary. It doesn't change anything meaningful. You do it from habit, from domestic instinct, the automatic and unconsidered gesture of a person in their own kitchen who doesn't want to make a mess. You do it when you're comfortable, when you're at ease, when wherever you are feels, to you, like somewhere you belong. Someone had stood at the center of his campsite in the dark, in remote wilderness, in the middle of the night, 4 feet from a sleeping stranger, and wrung out their tea bag, and felt comfortable doing it. He told one person, a friend who'd camped with him before, who knew how he operated out there. He told her over coffee a week later and watched her face as he described the cup and the tea bag and the absence of footprints. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "What if they've been watching that spot for a while? What if they've been there before?" He hadn't thought of it that way. He'd been thinking about the single night, the single visit, the single cup, but the question opened something he found he couldn't close again. If someone is comfortable enough in a place to make tea while someone sleeps 4 feet away, comfortable enough to be unhurried, to wring out the tea bag, to place the mug with the intention of returning, that comfort didn't develop overnight. That kind of ease in a place comes from knowing it, from having been there before, possibly many times, possibly across many seasons. He'd thought of that campsite as his, a private discovery, a place that belonged to him specifically because he'd found it and no one else seemed to know it was there. Someone else also knew it was there, had perhaps known it long before he did. He does not go camping anymore. He frames this as having grown out of it, found other ways to decompress, the usual explanations that people accept without questioning because they're plausible enough. And that's mostly true. There are other ways. But occasionally, in that specific silence that happens at 3 in the morning when a house settles and sleep won't come, he thinks about that campsite above the lake, about the flat rock in the morning light, about the cup placed at its center and the tea bag wrung out and set neatly to the side, and what it says, not just about that night, but about all the nights before it and all the ones that came after. And somewhere out there, between the dark and the pines, someone is still moving, still unhurried, still making tea in the quiet hours, in the cold dark, a few feet from someone who thinks they're alone, waiting for you to close your eyes. There is a version of this story where the cup has an explanation, where I missed another vehicle at the trailhead, or where a hiker came through from a different access point I didn't know about, or where the footprints were there and I simply didn't find them, where the explanation is mundane and coincidental and boring, and I just got spooked and built a horror story out of a stranger's discarded mug. I've tried to live in that version. I've spent a fair amount of time in it. But the tea bag keeps pulling me out. Because a stranger who stumbles on your camp in the dark, who helps themselves to your stove and makes tea and drinks half of it, that stranger is startled when you stir in your tent, that stranger sets the cup down on the ground and leaves quickly, that stranger does not wring out the tea bag, that stranger does not place the mug with deliberate precision at the center of the flat rock, as if making a presentation, as if leaving something for you to find. The tea bag is not a scared or thoughtless gesture, the tea bag is a comfortable one. That's the part I can't explain away. I've reorganized my life since then in ways that don't seek the kind of solitude I used to seek, the wilderness kind, the kind where the whole point is to be unreachable. I notice I've chosen places with other people on all sides. I found something on that mountain lake that I wasn't looking for. I found out that I had not been alone the whole time. And now I find I prefer to keep people close, lots of them, and close. The noise and inconvenience of other humans is, it turns out, exactly the point. Somewhere out there, the cup is still wherever cups like that end up, but the tea bag, wrung out and placed just so, I think about it more than I should, about the patience it implies, about the comfort, about whether they're making tea somewhere right now in the cold dark while someone sleeps nearby thinking they're completely alone, waiting, wringing out the bag. Thank you for staying till the end. If you loved listening the stories, please like and subscribe for stories like these every week, shared by real people. Comment below to let me know which story you found more disturbing. Thanks again for supporting the channel.